Here.
Was killed, the Secret Service agents normally walk directly beside the car on either side. We do not see any in this photograph, but usually 2 or 3 Secret Service agents will walk on either side of the car so that they are there to spot anyone who looks like a troublemaker. For firing the shot. It's most unusual, incidentally, that such a thing could happen because of the unusually tight security measures that are ordinarily taken by the Secret Service who guard the president. And normally, any vantage point, a rooftop, and windows which command a parade route are carefully scrutinized and carefully guarded, and men are usually posted on rooftops along a parade route, particularly if there is any reason at all to suppose that there might be someone in the area who would have such ideas as assassination in his mind regarding the president. These precautions, of course, are taken by the Secret Service for all presidents, as they have been for many years.
John Steigerwald now and then, something a little different today. It wasn't that long ago that there was a big deal made about the release of Kennedy files, JFK files that have been sitting around for a long time. I just had this feeling that it was kind of a nothing burger. There was some stuff that was revealed that was, I guess, new, but it just seemed to have, it just seems to come and gone. Not much happened. So I don't know if you know it or not, but there's a local guy from Bethel Park, and he's written a bunch of stuff about JFK and the Secret Service, and so I thought it would be a good idea to talk to him. Here he is. Well, Vince Palamara lives in Bethel Park, and he's written 7 books about the JFK assassination and or the Secret Service. And there he is. Hi, Vince, how you doing?
Good, John. Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm honored. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
so you have your most recent book is President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas. Am I correct?
Correct.
You've written so many books, it's kind of hard to keep up. But I just have to ask you, the recent release of the JFK files seems to have come and gone without a whole. I mean, I don't know. It seemed like a kind of a nothing burger. What happened with that? And were there things that came out that just weren't that new or interesting, or did the media and everybody else just kind of drop the ball on it?
Well, the short answer for the latest release, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it was a nothing burger, but it wasn't anything tantalizing. Whereas the releases back in 2017, there's basically a lot of releases between 2017 to 2023, nothing in 2024, and then the big splash this year. Well, back in 2017 to 2018, those releases were amazing. There was a lot of real good soundbite type of things, like where it's like someone's claiming they overheard the plot, it was imminent, it was coming. A document that showed Jack Ruby and Oswald know each other, and Oswald Tippit know each other.
And this wasn't the most recent one. This was the one in 18.
Yeah, 2017, 2018 was excellent. That was no nothing burger. That was good. And to be fair, the media was pretty good about those releases as far as the coverage there. Yeah, keep in mind, in the meantime, we went through, the presidential elections, Trump to Biden, back to Trump. So there didn't all the other things that happened in between. But to answer your question, the releases from 2017 to 2018 in particular were really good. The other ones were good from an addendum standpoint. But this last one, I don't know, in my opinion, it wasn't that good. But there's some people arguing with me, saying, "Oh no, Vince, it's a little esoteric, but there are some valuable things." But I didn't see anything really new. But now, having said that, now the hearings in Washington were really good. Yeah. They just had. That was good.
Well, you didn't see anything valuable, but was anything resolved as a result of those new releases? Could anybody declare that, okay, that's it, that's the final answer, and we know everything? And if not, now what? When do you get more?
Well, the good news is, ever since the late 90s up to the current time, when they had all this file releases, the late 90s Assassination Records Review Board, millions of pages came forward. The good news, it's filled in a lot of holes. It's really made this a scholarly thing. Back in the old days, it was theorizing. Between the 60s and the 80s, maybe the 90s, all theories, and not a lot to back things up, to be honest with you. Now, there's a lot of documentation, scholarly work, people with PhDs involved in this. We're never going to agree. I think good news is most people believe there's a conspiracy. That's the good news you want to call it good news. I think you can demonstrate a conspiracy. My 5th book, Honest Answers, talks about that. You can demonstrate a conspiracy, but when people say, okay, but Vince, who did it? Who was behind it? That's when you can't prove it in a court of law. We have a feeling it was the anti-Castro Cubans with the CIA, just a small rogue element.
You think that?
Yeah, and a lot of other researchers do, and authors do too. But that does not lend itself to the soundbite era, the TikTok, Facebook era we're in today. So when people want those short, okay, who did it? It doesn't lend itself to that. That's why it goes in a circle. And you even find, John, the research community, the many authors and researchers are still out there on the case. And the books sell, they do well, and this, that, and the other, don't agree. They have a different idea of who was involved. You would think that they're like, enemies with each other. So it just goes round and round. So the public interest is still there. But it's like a never-ending thing, to be honest. I'm always honest with people. I said, that's why it's never going to be resolved, because we're never going to agree. There's not the smoking gun that says, wow. Because to be honest, it's like what Norman Mailer said years ago. It's tantamount to leaving a Cadillac in Harlem for 30 years at that time and expecting it to still be whole. By that time, nothing's going to be in writing. And if it was purged years ago. So you just have scraps of things that kind of connect. So.
Did you have many conversations or any with Cyril Wecht?
Oh, yes. I tell you what, that man was a genius. Make a long story really short. Okay, I'm 58 going on 59. I got into this case when I was 12 years old, 1978. That was during the House Select Committee era. And I remember watching it with my mom and dad, and they were really interested. They loved President Kennedy, and they were also saddened by his death, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. And all of a sudden, Dr. Cyril Wecht, I said, well, I know that name from the local news. He was the county coroner. I used to hear Paul Long talk about Dr. Cyril Wecht. So I always remember that name, and it stuck out as a 12-year-old kid in middle school. And I was just riveted by his testimony, his public testimony, which still exists. It's on YouTube. And I was like, this guy's from Pittsburgh. Amazing. Now, fast forward to 1991, when I really seriously got involved in this case. Before that, I was just secondary sources, reading other people's books. I gave a conference presentation in Fredonia, New York, went over really well with a lot of authors and researchers. He contacted me. Dr. Wecht contacted me out of the blue. He said, this is Dr. Cyril Wecht. Hey, I heard your presentation was really good. I recognized the voice right away from documentaries. He goes, you know what? The Secret Service, I guess that's why they call the Secret Service secret. I frankly never really thought about them. Vince, you should think about maybe contacting these men. Have you ever thought about that? That laid the groundwork, the inspiration for, this was before the internet too. I started contact directory assistants, everything I could to find these men. A lot of them were in the Maryland, DC area, some in Florida. It was because of Dr. Wecht. And then now here, John, is going up to, obviously he passed away, not too long ago, but all through those years, the 90s and the millennium, I used to run into him at conferences. Like he'd present, I'd present, hey, Pittsburgh, oh, Vince, yeah. And we even did a documentary together in the UK during the height of the COVID crisis. Met downtown and had our masks on, had to be in separate rooms, this, that, but Dr. Wecht, unbelievable. What a genius.
Times. What a great guy. He worked right up till probably the minute that he died, he was probably still working. He was 93, I think, when he died, and he was working, I know, at the age of 93, because I talked to him, and he was in his office, so he was still working. But what are some of the new things that came out that should have gotten more attention and didn't, as far as you're concerned?
As far as this latest release?
Well, yeah, that too, but just in general. I mean, you're 7 books,
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I tell you, the big thing is for the longest time, as far as with the Secret Service goes, a lot of people look past, and I would say at the outset, I'm not accusing the Secret Service as an organization involved in anything. Yeah. To be honest with you, what happened was, going back to being a 12-year-old kid up to the present, all points in between, a lot of people had pet theories about what happened in Dallas. They'd blame, the mafia, CIA, and Hoover, and that. And it was very tantalizing. It makes you really think something. But I always, the first time I saw the Zapruder film and other films of foes, I said, how come the Secret Service agents weren't around a limousine? I had a special interest in the Secret Service because it's still my favorite show to this day, The Wild Wild West, a fictional show about the 19th century
Yeah.
Secret Service, James
Yeah.
West and Artemis Gordon.
Yep.
I had that, so it was like it kind of like dual thing. So at the same time, I'm watching reruns. I'm like, oh, those are the Secret Service agents. That's Clint Hill, and that's the driver Sam Kinney, and I was just getting fascinated. But I was like, okay, even as a young kid, I was like, why aren't any agents around the car? Why didn't they do their job? I'm wondering, boy, could Kennedy have lived if they would have did their job? But a lot of time, I didn't have anything to back up for years until answer you directly. What happened was when I started interviewing these men in the early 90s, they told me a lot of things that went against official history. And the big thing of all, John, you probably heard is like, supposedly President Kennedy's favorite poem was he had a rendezvous with death. Meantime, we all have a rendezvous with death. We're not immortal, but they made it like a Shakespearean thing because they wanted to make it like, well, it's a Shakespearean like tragedy, the triumph and tragedy of the Kennedys. He's reckless with his social life, a little bit exaggerated there, but it's true. He definitely had some extracurricular stuff. And they also say that he was reckless of his security. Now, this gets directly to the heart of the matter. They blame him for agents not being by or on the rear of the limousine. They blame him for the top not being on the car. They blame him for the motorcycles not being around the car and other things. I find that that's all bunk. It's not true. And people always say, well, what's a date that's a touchstone in your research? It's September 27th, 1992. I spoke to the head of the White House detail, Gerald Bain. He was in the Secret Service from the FDR to LBJ days, and he was JFK and LBJ's special agent in charge. So the number one guy. And at that time, I begrudgingly believed some of the pablum, some of the mythology, and he cut me off. And he said, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of a car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. It was like a cottonmouth, I can't believe what I'm hearing moment. He just single-handedly said this was all bunk. There's no truth to Kennedy ever ordering him off the car. But when I calmed down after I got off the car, I was so like, wow, this is riveting. It's amazing. I said to myself, you always have to think like a defense attorney. Like, well, somebody out there might say he was very lucid. He was 76, but he was fine. No problem mentally or anything whatsoever. Recalled names, everything. But people could say, oh, it's this one guy in the wilderness, Vince, albeit the number one agent. Well, what happened, John? This is why I have books, and this is why I had anything to write about. It was like they were reading cue cards. They were all starting to emulate the same thing, saying the same thing. They had no chance to like go on the internet and check me out or compare notes. They were all saying, oh, President Kennedy was a very nice man, never interfered with our actions at all, never ordered us off the car. And it just got more and more than that. So not only you had that, but then the whole thing about the bubble top, Sam Kinney, the driver of the Falk car in Dallas and elsewhere, he was adamant that he, Sam, was solely responsible for the top's removal. Kennedy had nothing to do with it. But if you read books, they always blame him for it. And he had nothing to do with the motorcycle coverage. Usually Kennedy's car was covered by like sometimes even two phalanx of motorcycles on each side. Well, when he gets to Dallas, it's brought down to four, and they're behind the rear wheels, which makes it a meaningless thing. He's wide open. And they said that Winston Lawson, the lead advance agent, said, well, my understanding is President Kennedy wanted to have conversations in the car, but yet the prior Texas stop in San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth, he had a lot of motorcycles around the car and many other trips he had it. And when Alan Dulles of the Warren Commission asked him under oath, was there anything that President Kennedy said? And then Winston Lawson admitted, not the specific orders from him, no. So they did it on their own. So what happened was it took years to ferret this out between interviewing these guys in retirement, comparing films and photos. And keep in mind, John, it was only another thing about new items. It's only been the last 5 to 15 years that a lot of films and photos have been digitally remastered or even released. So now you can finally go, wow, okay, look at this motorcade. There's agents on the back of the car. Look, here's the bubble top. He's smiling. They're going fast. It's not raining. Look at all these motorcycles. And then you find out another major thing before we can keep up. Oh, just to let people know, they go to my YouTube channel, which is Vince Palamara, and it comes right up on the first page. There's a video. It's 2.5 hours long. I actually looped together. It took years to find these, all the known motorcade films and photos. And so you can see different and compare it to Dallas, and the contrast is amazing. That's the first thing. But during the COVID lockdown, John, in 2020, amazing thing. Ron Gardner of ABC TV, Kennedy's not declared dead yet. And he's saying, I can't understand how something like this could happen. Normally, building rooftops are guarded as they've been guarded for presidents for many years. And I can't understand how this could have happened. Well, it turns out there's a lot to back Ron Gardner up, I found out. There was two Secret Service books written before the assassination by, with the help of Chief Inspector Michael Trina, who was the chief inspector who wrote the Secret Service manual. Matter of fact, he says whenever a president's in a motorcade, multi-story building rooftops are guarded. I spoke to the lead motorcycle officer, Russell Groover, in Tampa, and during that 28-mile motorcade, Dallas was only 10 miles long, 28-mile motorcade, every multi-story building rooftop was guarded. They didn't do that in Dallas. I was going to say, for the listeners and viewers, there's none of that coverage in Dallas. So even if somebody plays always with Oswald, well, little old Oswald would have been taken care of if they wouldn't have had that coverage. They had the resources 4 days before in Tampa. They get to Dallas, a city he was warned about going to, and there's no coverage from the rooftops. So it was just like, John, it was like one thing after another. Yeah. We can get into even more specifics you want, but yeah.
The security and the coverage of his limo in Dallas, contrasting it against these other places he went. So that's just one more thing that adds to anybody who has a conspiracy theory that they wanted the guy to be shot, because otherwise, why was this protection so lax compared to these other places? Is
right, John.
And what's the reason for that?
You're exactly right. And the thing is, it came out, it took years for us to come out. Not only just little old me, an amateur in the wilderness, interviewing all these gentlemen. Some of them were on audio too. Thank God, a lot of them, since most of them have passed on. So thank God I have them audio taping and or in writing, this, that, and the other. But thank God these films and photos have come forward so you could see, wow, look at the coverage he got here. Because for years, John, we only had the inaugural and Dallas and very little in between. So it was just like, it was speculation to even raise these questions without interviewing these men. A lot of these men never spoke to the Warren Commission, the House Select Committee, to authors, nobody. And it's amazing. So it's definitely leads one towards suspicion. I'll say this: at the very least, it's gross negligence, or was it somebody who went in there to try to make sure security was lax? I get to tell you, the Dallas motorcade, up to and including Main Street, the main thoroughfare, there was hundreds, thousands of people all over the place. They make that hairpin turn, from Maine to Houston to Elm, past the book depository in Grassy Knoll. There's hardly anybody in Dealey Plaza at that point, and they were supposed to be more police run the entire route. There was very few, and they were facing the president instead of facing the crowd. There was no undercover detectives, no Secret Service allegedly on the ground. So you had all that. But the bottom line is, just to so I don't confuse viewers and listeners, that the bottom line is they made it sound like it was a blame the victim thing. Kennedy's safely dead. He can't be cross-examined, and it sounded like, okay, that sounds plausible. President Kennedy didn't want them there. But and again, this is the 60s, before Woodward and Bernstein, before investigative journalism really took root, before people questioned their government. So the Secret Service were the good guys, so never even thought to look or, that's a blasphemy, didn't question their procedures and that. And it wasn't until years later that the little old me for the most part was doing it. And it was only because these gentlemen were telling me something else. If they would have told me, if they were lying, said, "Oh, you're barking up the wrong tree, son. He didn't want us on the back of the car. And he wanted the bubble top off," then it'd be like, there'd be no book. They would have been years ago, it'd have been like, went on to something else. But John, they were telling me he never interfered with their actions at all. He had nothing to do with motorcycles beside the car. This is baloney. The people who were telling me is amazing. Only Gerald Bain, the head of the White House detail, his direct assistant, Floyd Boring, also in the Secret Service since the FDR days, the number 1 and number 2 agents were just telling me, there's not true. President Kennedy's a very nice man, never interferes at all, never orders off the car. And I would keep reiterating too, when I got a chance after my initial shocking call with Gerald Bain, to make sure there's no wiggle room. Sometimes did he? Maybe. Nope. They said nah. And then when I spoke to Dan Emmett, who was an agent who guarded Obama and Bush Sr., he said the presidents don't have time to think about those things. They're too worried about world events, their speech. They're not thinking.
That. If what's there when you present these guys with that theory that it was JFK who was responsible for what appeared to be a lack of security, what's their answer? Whose fault was it? Why wasn't there more security there? I mean, the title of your book is President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas. Do those guys think he should have survived Dallas? The guys
yeah, basically in a roundabout way. But it was like playing polo with a greased watermelon. He wouldn't really come down hard on anything. You could tell they were grasping with it too, because it's like, so on the one hand, they were definitely saying President Kennedy had nothing to do with this stuff. All these things he's been blamed for years. But then when you would try to nail it down, well, then why do you think this was, I have no idea why this was said in that. And to be honest with you, I didn't go for the jugular like I should have. I kicked myself. Back in the 90s, I was too gentle. I should have said, well, do you realize, sir, there's this claim that President Kennedy, see what it boils down to, John, 4 days before Dallas, President Kennedy had tremendous security in Tampa. Agents were on the back of the car. They're going at a fast rate of speed. There's a whole bunch of motorcycles all over the car. Military aid rode in the car. Multi-story building rooftops are guarded. Russell Groover, the lead motorcycle officer, told me about this. And it was also documents that only came out in the late 90s showing multi-story building rooftops are guarded. So security was excellent, especially for the time. He gets to Dallas, nothing like that whatsoever. But those documents only came out in the late 90s. A lot of these gentlemen passed away, in the years after I spoke to them. So, and then a lot of the motorcade films and photos only came out from the new millennium onward. So then it wasn't a case of, oh, Vince, back in 1992, why didn't you say this person, why you have this, and this? It was basically, I can't believe this guy's telling me this. Okay, maybe he's mistaken. Let's go on to the next one. He's telling me the same thing. President Kennedy never ordered him to do anything. And it was just built like that. Like I always tell people, there'd be no book if it wasn't for these guys telling me something. And then later on, when the films and photos came out. Now, for the $64 million question is, okay, Vince, do you think this is sinister? I always leave it, like, let's put it this way. It certainly leads towards suspicion. I have 3 agents I think who definitely might have crossed the line, and I name them, and I can name them here. There's no problem there in a moment. But I have a hard time believing the agency as a whole was involved in this, but at the same time, it's like, this is a city JFK was born in. In fact, President Kennedy even said famously, we're heading to nut country now. And in the morning, he said that, boy, last night would have been a hell of a night to assassinate a president. And in fact, on KDKA in 1988, they had Marty Underwood, a retired former Democratic National Committee advance man, who I actually spoke to a few years after that. And he said that 18 hours before the assassination, they were getting all sorts of rumors that President Kennedy was going to get shot in Dallas. Marty went to the president. President Kennedy said, oh, Marty, you worry about me too much. And Senator Henry Gonzalez is on record saying, oh, the Secret Service took care of everything. There's nothing to worry about. And then Jim Lehrer wrote a famous article that came out that morning before the assassination, said, Secret Service is sure, all secure. So the feeling was, well, okay, he's going to be good in the Big D, despite this worry about the John Birch Society, and there was members of the Dallas Police, unfortunately, that were in the KKK, and this was the so-called city of hate, they called it at the time. It was definitely not a pro-Kennedy town, and like I said, there was a lot of people hoping he wouldn't go to Dallas. And then what magic, Lee Harvey Oswald, one single man, in a building, shoots a man in a car. Oswald adamantly denies it. Now it's coming out years later. No, we know. I have to thank Dr. Weck for that. The medical evidence appears to show that he shot from the front. The Zapruder film flies backwards to the left. The back of the head appears to be gone from medical witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I have a hard time too with it, because on the one hand, I have my evidence why I wrote books and whatnot. But then when people try to nail me down, Vince, this seems sinister. And depending on my mood, I do. But then there's other times I just think maybe it was gross negligence. I try to leave it out. But it's hard to be innocent about it. I'll tell you what, John, speaking of Pittsburgh, when Kennedy came to Pittsburgh, October 62, this came out the day of the assassination, the reportage in the Pittsburgh Press. I have it in one of my books, talking about, oh, this could have never happened in Pittsburgh. We had sharpshooters on buildings, and we made sure if there was anything untoward in any kind of building rooftop, the person wanted to live to see another motorcade and things of that nature. So he had that kind of protection when he gets to little old Pittsburgh. But again, it's just amazing. And yeah, we can get into more specifics too.
Yeah, after the release of the new stuff, and when everybody was talking about this again, there was a thing going viral on social media that purported to show the driver of the limousine turning around and shooting Kennedy from the front, and a lot of people thought that looked pretty realistic. And you see Kennedy go this way, and it looks like his head goes back. What do you make of that? What did you think when you saw that video? I'm sure you saw it, or that claim. Years. And what do you think of it?
Well, it's good news, bad news. The bad news is I don't think that Bill Greer, the driver, shot Kennedy. However, he's one of my 3 suspects for crossing the line. Here's the bottom line. Even people that believe Oswald acted alone, famous author Gerald Posner, famous author Vince Bugliosi, a Charles Manson fame, they wrote 2 famous Oswald did it books.
And he trashed Cyril Weck too, Bugliosi.
Yeah, it's disgusting, but that, well, it's true. It's an story in itself. But even they blamed Greer for the success of the assassination. And here's what happened for many years, John.
And he's the driver now, Greer.
He's the driver. Many people thought he only turned back once and looked in Kennedy's direction. That it. But back in 1991, during that conference I was talking about, that Dr. Weckner called me about, that he heard all the good things about it, I point out people when I slow-mode the Zapruder film, he actually turns back twice. The sequence is crucial. First shot of shots rings out, Kennedy's like this, and everyone's looking at him, including Bill Greer. Now, during Roy Kellerman's Warren Commission testimony, Roy Kellerman's the agent sitting next to him. He's a third stringer, by the way, Roy Kellerman. This is his first major trip on his own. I make the analogy, it's like going to the Super Bowl and Tom Brady, we're going to sit you down. Who's a third stringer? Hey, come on up. Let's see you start this game. That's basically what it was like, making a sports analogy. But anyway, bottom line, first shots ring out. He looks back. Roy Kellerman says, "Get out of line. We've been hit." Roy Kellerman grabs a radio microphone. That's when Greer turns around a second time. Is staring right at Kennedy, and Kennedy's killed. All he does is he faced forward, hit the gas. He denied all this to the Warren Commission. Although that night to the FBI, he lays the blame work on Kennedy after feeling remorse all day, supposedly. He tells Jackie Kennedy and Kenny O'Donnell, "Oh, if only I would have seen it, I would have hit the gas sooner." Oh, but he gets to the night and he goes, "There were times that President Kennedy instructed us to slow down." So in other words, the blame the victim thing was already being set in motion that night at the autopsy room, and it continued in that critical 63, 64 period. You know, if I would have interviewed these agents now back in 63, 64, they either would have said no comment, or they would have said, "Oh, well, President Kennedy didn't want us there." And they would have the problem, because that's what protected them, because there was nobody, cross-examining them. There was nobody looking at films and photos. But Greer, now here's the interesting thing about Greer. You've heard about, John, I'm sure you've heard about all the mystery deaths related to this assassination through the years, people that died mysteriously. There's a death that happened, I found this out in the late 90s, that happened the month before the assassination at Camp David. President Kennedy's driver agent, one of his 3 driver agents, Thomas B. Shipman, he dies of an alleged heart attack at Camp David. He's the only Kennedy agent to die during the Kennedy administration, and he's only one of about 38 agents from 1865 to the president who died in the line of duty. No one ever heard of this guy, including me, and it took years to ferret this information. I thought so to his family as well. And obscure Baltimore, Maryland newspaper articles came out and said, "Kennedy agent dies of heart attack." Well, he was buried 2 days later. No toxicology test. You know, they say there's an old country doctor thing. If they can't see if you were stabbed or shot, heart attack. No toxicology. He's buried 2 days later. Well, I contacted his family, and there's an old lawyer's adage: don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to. Because these people could have rained on my parade and said, "Vince, get a life. He had a heart ailment or whatnot." Instead, his family was saying to me, we were shocked too at the time. His daughter, Laura, said, "We don't know what my father, why. He just passed an annual physical. He had to be fit and fiddle to be a Secret Service agent, especially a driver. Because if he dies, he's taking out dignitaries, the president, and or people in the crowd, this, that, and the other. He just passed. He had no known heart ailments, no nothing." He was slated to drive Kennedy in Dallas. They were taking a pecking order, and Thomas Shipman had family in Dallas, confirmed by his relatives. They didn't want money or fame or nothing. Just tell me matter of factly. And I was going dry. They could have blown the whole thing out of the water and said, "Oh, he had a heart ailment. There's nothing to this." They were shocked too. And for years, they were wondering about this too. But no one ever heard this Thomas Shipman. Just in the interest of time, I'll make this real quick. There was an obscure, unpublished manuscript that was published later on called "A Million Miles of Presidents" by a former Secret Service agent, George McNally, who became a White House Signal Corps agent. He was on all the trips from basically Truman to Nixon, early Nixon days. And he wrote this real boring assessment of like motorcades and trips. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, right before Kennedy assassination, he talks about Thomas Shipman, one of Kennedy's drivers, died suddenly. Now, for somebody like me, I was fall off my seat like, what? And that's where it took years to ferret this out of this Thomas Shipman. Is he real? Spoke to other agents. He said, "Oh, yeah, we found him in one of the cabins in Camp David. I think it was a heart attack." And again, it left Bill Greer to drive Kennedy in Dallas. And before you even go further than that, Bill Greer, the driver, died in 1985. I spoke to his son, Richard, in 1991. And real nice conversation until I got to one area. I said, "What did your father think of President Kennedy?" The line went like dead, like, this was awkward. He's not answering me. So I went on to other things that he answered. Then I went back to, "Sir, if you don't mind, what did your father think of President Kennedy?" He said, "Well, we're Methodists. JFK was Catholic." Bill Greer emigrated to this country from Ireland at the age of 18. And here's another thing, it wasn't until 2013, the Irish Times of all contacted me out of the blue and said to Vince, well, the interesting thing about the Greer family, he was part of the Orange Order, the Order of the Orange. They're very anti-Catholic and whatnot. I'm like, okay, so we have the driver of the car replaced someone who died mysteriously, who has these weird feelings that Kennedy were Methodist and JFK was Catholic, and he acts suspicious and he does what he does. I mean, that really is like, wow. So
Hey Vince,
again,
I want to stop and take a break here. Hold on, we'll be right back, okay?
sounds good.
Okay. To later on. So thanks for watching that one, and I'll talk to you later. Okay, continuing here with Vince Palamara. The name of the book is President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas. It's one of 7 books he's written about the JFK assassination and/or the Secret Service, the history of the Secret Service, and lots of stuff. A lot of books written by Vince, who's from Bethel Park. So we're going to continue the conversation here. I want to get to my one question about the release of the new stuff, which was in the last month or so since President Trump was elected, inaugurated, I should say. Um, what is the of all the stuff that what's the biggest difference between or what the stuff that came out in that most recent release? Um, why is it? Why did it seem like a big deal? And what is the one thing that you would have liked to have gotten more attention? We covered that a little bit before, but I want to kind of
Sure.
get back to that.
Oh,
What's
okay. Well, I can tell you there's files that still haven't been released. The House Select Committee was the second government investigation after the Warren Commission, and they found a probable conspiracy, whereas the Warren Commission famously said it was Oswald, no conspiracy.
yeah?
Well, in executive session testimony behind closed doors,
This is
not staff,
recently now.
well, this is documents we're still hoping to get.
Okay.
Okay, and we'll all into that part in a second about the recent stuff, but they still have not been released. Is they interviewed the special agent in charge of the Chicago office of the Secret Service and the special in charge of the White House detail, Gerald Bain, and they have yet to be released. We were hoping this is going to be one of several they're going to be released in the files. And I know Jefferson Morley and some other authors, some of these people testified in Washington, the Luna hearings and whatnot, and they were hoping to get more. So they're hoping this isn't the end. This is great. These hearings got tremendous publicity and interest. They're just hoping there's going to be more. Now, I can tell you what, these files seem to be more towards people that have like interested in this history of the anti-Castro Cubans and the CIA. There's been some really interesting stuff there. So I don't speak to that because I'm not an expert on it. Like people that are authors of that, and they would probably disagree with me and say, Vince, what are you talking about? There's been some amazing things in these files, but I'm with you as far as unlike prior releases, I don't think there's anything the public can really sink their teeth into, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's more esoteric. But there's those files from the House Select Committee that I know that there's a lead on that they're trying to find them because again, it was behind closed doors. Some of these people were put under oath and it didn't make it into the House Select Committee report. And you might say, well, Vince, do you have an idea what they are? And I do know something about this. Is I spoke to the special agent in charge of the Chicago office, Maurice Martineau, who believed there was a conspiracy. He's one of about 6 or 7 agents I spoke to that believed there was a conspiracy. In fact, he says he knows there was a conspiracy. I just don't get into theories, and I'm not going to divulge why I feel that way to some stranger on the phone. But at the time, in 1993, when I first spoke to him, I was just blown away by it. In fact, I spoke in an executive session of the House Select Committee, and their investigation was 10 times better than that lousy Warren Commission. And so he was just really amazing. And the thing about him is being in charge of the Chicago office, that's where many authors and researchers, including yours truly, believe that there was a prior plot to President Kennedy that was foiled. In other words, it was a moving crime. Yeah. John, you kind of, oh, there you go. Now your voice is back now.
You wrote a book about the Chicago plot to kill Kennedy.
Yes, I did. Yeah, and basically what it boils down to is in March of '63, the police got word of Puerto Rican snipers, plural, more than one person, Puerto Rican snipers, not Lee Harvey Oswald. Helicopters searched the roofs of buildings and nothing was found. The fact the police got wind of this when Kennedy was trying to go to Chicago again, they had everything all set up with Mayor Daley in Chicago and everything. They canceled the motorcade at the last minute. It was November 2nd, 20 days for the assassination in Dallas. I spoke to the first African-American agent of the White House detail, Abraham Bolden, who's still with us. And he's adamant there was a conspiracy, and he's adamant that there was a team of 4 gunmen, and a few of them eluded surveillance. He's written a book called The Echo in Dealey Plaza back in 2008. It's a tremendous book about him and his life story and whatnot. But the bottom line is there's definitely echoes of conspiracy based on the Chicago special agent in charge and, regular agent Abraham Bolton on this trip. And also 4 days before Dallas, when he went to Miami, there was word of anti-Castro threats against President Kennedy. And there's some people saying, maybe that's the reason why the security was just outstanding, because they got wind of threats. But famously, John, like I said before, when he gets to Dallas, it's a big nothing burger. They allegedly find not one person in Dallas who wished the president ill. That'd be like Obama going to Mississippi. Oh, no threats here, sir. You're all safe to travel. And find nobody. It's very hard to believe. Even if the president comes to Pittsburgh or anywhere, there's got to be some nutcase or something, and they didn't find anything. So that's very suspicious in and of itself. Yeah.
Cyril Wecht about secret. This came out very recently in the last year and a half or so, I guess. That was not long before Cyril Wecht died. A guy came out and talked about the bullet that was found on
Yes.
John Connolly's stretcher, I think it was. He's the governor of Texas who was shot in that same incident. And there was something new about that bullet that he was divulging. I believe he was a Secret Service agent who said, "Yeah, I
Correct.
saw a bullet," and then I forget what happened after that. But what's the deal on the bullet that they found on John Connolly's stretcher, and nobody was talking about it until 60 years later?
Yeah, Paul Landis is the Secret Service agent you're talking to. I attempted to speak to him back in the 90s, but he always just would never turn my calls, playing this wiggle room. So, but he's the one who came up with a book called The Final Witness. It was a huge best-selling book that shows the interest of this case will never die. It was the fall of 2023, and his book came out. He also spoke at Duquesne University with Dr. Wecht. 88 going on 68. The guy is incredible. Paul Landis still has a baby face and everything, but I digress. The bottom line with him is he's claiming in this book, he's claiming in public that he found the so-called magic pristine bullet not on a stretcher, but on the back seat of the presidential limousine, just sitting there.
Somebody dropped it on the stretcher.
And then, and this goes into chain of possession. How could the bullet be there? He's claiming the whole thing is amazing as far as the idea that this was planted.
Yeah, now I'm remembering it. So just to clear it up, the bullet was found on the stretcher that John Connolly was on in the hospital, but this guy saying that somebody put it there because he found that bullet. It was in the car, in the limo.
Right. And it was undamaged. And just the whole chain of possession is unbelievable, because this leads to suspicion. Like, wait a minute, time out, you find it there. How can it have gone out of Connolly's body, allegedly, and be on the back seat? It's like Dr. Wecht was on a field day with this. This is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because if what you're telling me is true, that bullet's definitely planted. Something's rotten in Denmark. The fact it had to be dropped on a stretcher. Now, here's the other thing, too. There's conflicting accounts. It was on JFK stretcher as opposed to Connolly's. Then, way back in the 60s, Josiah Tink Thompson wrote a best-selling book, 6 Seconds of Dallas. And he found through his research, it was a little boy named Ronnie Fuller. The bullet was found on that stretcher. So you got three stretcher stories. But you have this agent who came out, Paul Landis. The interesting thing about Paul Landis, what he left out of his book, I'm very disappointed about, is he wrote 2 Secret Service reports right after the assassination stating a shot came from the front. He's one of the famous grassy knoll witnesses because he claims.
And what's he saying now?
He's not. He didn't say anything in his book. I'm very disappointed with that. So are other people that are in the know. The John Q. Citizens not going to know.
No.
I'm thinking he came out with this best-selling book, doesn't tell his readers he wrote 2 reports. Oh, by the way, they're in the Warren Commission Volume 18, so it's not a conspiracy theory. Right there are the reports, and he's saying the shot came from the right front. And yet he doesn't tell his readers in 2023 about this. It's amazing. He also, wait to get this, John, in 2016, he came out against a single bullet theory to his local Cleveland newspaper. I think it was a Cleveland Plain Dealer. Mm-hmm. And also in that same year, he traveled to Texas for an oral history at the 6th floor museum. It's book depository is now a museum. And Paul Landis said the right rear Kennedy's head was gone. He's joining the chorus of all the medical people and some bystanders that seem to indicate a shot came from the front, because entrance wounds are small, exit wounds are large. And he's, matter of fact, he's saying that the rear wound was right here, which he never divulged for years. Now, to be honest, a lot of people weren't seeking him out for years either. But there you go. So it's like, but yet he doesn't say that in his book either. It's very disappointing. And so I wrote a review. In fact, the review is actually going to be reprinted in the book that's coming out next month called President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas. And I dissect his book, Gerald Blaine's book, Clint Hill. Those three, Clint Hill just passed away in February, but those three guys are the guys who are carrying the torch for either blaming the president for what went down in Dallas or other things that go against official history, and they just can't understand what they're saying. Like over and over again in Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill's book, they're saying the right rear of Kennedy's head was missing, and they don't believe the single bullet theory, yet they say Oswald acted alone. They don't understand like that you can't have it both ways. And the interesting thing, and I'll keep this short, is that back in 2010 and 2012, this is before my first book even came out. Okay, it was just a self-published affair. I'm out in the wilderness here in Pittsburgh. They brought me up, Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine, to C-SPAN's Brian Lamb, the CEO. I didn't know where they talk about Little Will Be, and he show a YouTube channel as this young gentleman, he's a Duquesne graduate. What do you have to think about his criticism of the Secret Service? I was sitting there bored, I couldn't believe it. And before I catch my breath, 2 years later, here's Clint Hill talking about his best-selling book, major best-selling book about Jackie. And out of nowhere, this fellow, Vince Palamara from Pittsburgh, remember talking about him last time? And everyone was writing me and calling me in emails at Vince, thou protestest too much. Why are these guys talking about, and he meant this in a good way, little old you, what's up with this? Well, because and here's the story, John. I sent a 22-page letter to Clint Hill in the summer of 2005, which was like a Cliff Notes version of my research, saying what I found. I'm sorry, sir, but your colleagues are telling me President Kennedy ordered you guys off the car. Well, I ended up calling him. He was angry, and he didn't want anything to do with me. He was just really mad at my letter. We won't go into why he was mad. Well, a couple of interesting things happened in 2005. Out of nowhere, Gerald Blaine started writing his book, The Kennedy Detail, became a major bestseller. I had a threatening letter from his attorney telling me to cease and desist about my blogs about Gerald Blaine and his forthcoming book. I had threats given to me at my former place of employment by a friend of Gerald Blaine. He tried to get me fired for my unpatriotic writings about a former Secret Service agent. Unbelievable. But this is all happening. And these guys were fly fishing in Colorado. They were friends for 50 years, served the Denver field office. And I know where people were like, why did Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine write these books? No delusions of grandeur. They literally started because of little old me out there. And if you read The Kennedy Detail by Gerald Blaine, you'll come away going, wow, he keeps blaming President Kennedy. It's like a mantra and over again. Okay, so you guys had nothing to do with it, huh? Just Kennedy didn't want you in the back of the car. When I spoke to Gerald Blaine a year before he started writing his book, he was one of the agents who told me, oh, President Kennedy never interfered with our actions at all. But I think he realized the ramifications of what I was finding when I sent the letter to Clint Hill. And yeah. So
let's go now, but I want to ask you one thing. And the book is coming out next month. It's President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas. So you're looking there and here listening to Vince Palamara, who's from Bethel Park, by the way. The last thing I want to get into, the assassination attempt in Butler. Not that you've done research into that, but
I did a little bit.
I guess I was figuring you probably did because it's the Secret Service. What have you learned, if anything, about what kind of a job the Secret Service did or didn't do that day in Butler?
It's a miracle that President Trump wasn't assassinated. He came within a hair,
right,
like an inch. What's crazy about it is they did have rooftop counter assault team on the sloped roof of the building, catacorner to the one of the Thomas Crooks, ironically from Bethel Park. Was their assassin. Now, everybody in real time on their iPhone video going, there's someone on the roof. He has a rifle. Look, he's here real time. Trump talking. What I learned is they had building rooftops guarded for Trump, and yet they don't do anything. Even when John Q. Citizen screaming, how in God's green earth did this kid, anybody, let alone a kid, get an assault weapon onto an adjoining sloped rooftop? The counter assault team waits forever. He's able to fire, and only then do they take him out. I mean, this could have been another tragedy.
But the thing is that this smells a lot like what you've been talking about with where people are going to look at what happened, and they are looking at what happened and saying somebody wanted Donald Trump dead because that's too the lack of protection is just too insane and too shoddy to make anybody believe that it could be anything but purposeful.
And I would agree with that. It pains me to say, because I'm actually admiring the Secret Service. I've read a lot of pro Secret Service stuff in some of my books. I have a book called Who's Who in the Secret Service. But it is what it is. These guys, they live and breathe to protect the president. There's counter assault teams on an adjoining roof. People that are total amateurs are filming real time. Here's Donald Trump. He gets speaking, so you can code the time of the video. He's on the rooftop. Oh my God,
Yeah.
he has a rifle. It's negligence of the unbelievable. It's just like a fluke that President Trump lived, as opposed to protection. Yeah, they took him out after everything was telling him what to do. But yeah, I agree with you, John. It's just amazing.
So when you say you agree with me, are you highly suspect that, or what level of suspicion would you have that the Secret Service was kind of letting it happen?
It pains me to say this, but I got to go off what I see and what I saw in those videos. I hate to say it, so I'm going to say it. I think there's an agent or two that might have been anti-Trump, and
Wow.
it's action through inaction. I got to say something real quick, John, real quick, because I didn't get to it before. A few of the agents were very much against President Kennedy for his private life, as well as,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah,
part about Vietnam,
and
Cuba.
Kennedy had a private life that nobody talked. Today, he wouldn't have been able to get away with it for 5 minutes, but he did it
Right,
all the time, and everybody knew about it. But he just didn't talk about that stuff back then.
right. And Tim McIntyre was one of the agents on the fob car, feet away from Kennedy. He famously for me, went on ABC in 1997. I spoke to him as well. He says, yeah, if you ever procure prostitutes around, you say to yourself, what do these people think of us? He's calling Kennedy a procurer of prostitutes, and he was described. Yeah, he was saying he was angry at President Kennedy. He speaks for a dead agent who died in 1973, Emory Roberts, one of my three suspects. One of them, Floyd Boring, Emory Roberts, or Bill Greer, the three agents I think it crossed the line when it comes to Kennedy. Well, he talks about how Emory Roberts talked about Kennedy a lot, talked about his private life a lot, told him, don't even tell your wife, don't tell anything about this. He was so concerned. And yet Emory Roberts, when the shooting began on Elm Street, ordered the men not to move. Sam Kinney, the driver, matter of factly confirmed this, but then immediately backtracked as well. He's probably trying to make sure that no one else jumped out of the car, was run over. When I spoke to other agents about it, they said that no. Your whole reason for living is to protect the president, cover and evacuate. You're not caring about your own safety. So the fact he ordered him not to move, there's a famous video I discovered in 1991, in the interest of time. You might have seen it or heard about it. There's an agent at Love Field Airport in Dallas that day when the motorcade starts out. He raises his hand 3 times in disgust. It's called off the limo. That's Don Lawton. Well, when I spoke to him in 1995, he said that I should have been there. I should have been on the back of the car. If only agents would have been on the back of the car. And yet it turned out he was the agent who was recalled in the video. The picture speaks 1,000 words. When you see this video, John, I have it on my YouTube channel several times. It's just amazing. The motorcade's run out. He's jogging next to Kennedy, and an agent in the fob car, turned out to be Emory Roberts, goes like this and waves it back. And then he goes like this 3 times, just stands there and doesn't get on the fob car. And
he's mad.
Yeah, he's pissed. And again, he died in 2012. And there was an article in the Idaho local newspaper there. And a military intelligence friend of him spoke for Don Lawton and said that he always said, I should have been there. I should have been on the back of the car, as he had been in Tampa 4 days before, in Chicago earlier in 1963. So that's pretty amazing in and of itself. You talk about security stripping. Yeah, in 1991, I got all these ABC videos on VHS, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I played it over and over again. Oh my God, look at this. And I've showed it at conferences. I showed it on the men who killed Kennedy and some other things. And it's just amazing. And it's really hard to make an innocent explanation for us when you see this. You can't hear it because there's the newsmen from WFA, ABC are talking over and say, oh, there's President Kennedy. His car is leaving the field. And you need to see it from a distance. He's going like this. And it's just pretty amazing there. Yeah. So
the book is President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas. You say it's coming out next month.
Yeah, late May 29th. Yeah.
All right. Good luck with it. Hope to talk to you again after it comes out.
Definitely will, John Hayes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Vince.
Okay.
See ya.
If you'd had protection in Dallas from the rear, Jack Kennedy would still be alive. Yes, he would. If you'd had protection in Dallas from the rear, Jack Kennedy would still be alive. Yes, he would.
I want to go back for a moment, and I hate to focus on gory details, but there's a great deal of debate about the head wound itself. Is there any way you can describe sort of what you observed as far as where the head wound was located?
Not knowing medical terms, right rear head.
You observed as far as where the head wound was located?
Not knowing medical terms, right rear head.
But the right side of his face was up. I could see his eyes were fixed. I could see into the skull. There was a hole in his skull. And you could see that part of the brain was gone. It wasn't even there. So I just turned to give a thumbs down to the follow-up car crew because I thought it was a fatal wound. He was dead. I could see his eyes were fixed. I could see into the skull. There was a hole in his skull.
The president's friend, Dave Powers, now director of the Kennedy Library in Boston, remembers talking to a grief-stricken Bill Greer, the Secret Service agent who drove Kennedy's car. What if they'd sped out of Dealey Plaza after the first shots, but before the fatal one?
I thought it always, and so did he, you know, Bill, all those agents were very close to us, and that they felt so bad.
If the driver of the president's car had stepped on the gas after the first two shots,
yes,
what?
That president would be alive today, and he'd be 71 years old, and he'd be the director here, and and I'd be the assistant.
And what he was doing was, when he came back off the car, he was saying, "Okay, you guys, I'm going to lunch. Have a good trip." And what he was doing was, when he came back off the car, he was saying, "Okay, you guys, I'm going to lunch. Have a good trip."
The presidential car moving out. The president and first lady. Big, beautiful Lincoln, followed by a carload of press.
Tonight we dip back into our archives as we remember. Tonight we dip back into our archives as we remember.
It's very obvious it's a thinly veiled attempt to rewrite history and to blame President Kennedy without trying to blame him for his own assassination.
He alleges that because he sent me a letter, 22 pages in length apparently, and that I discussed that with Jerry. I forgot that I ever got a 22-page letter from this particular individual until I heard him say it on TV. And I never discussed it with Jerry or anybody else because it wasn't important to me. And insofar as him being an expert, I don't know where the expert part came from. I spent a long time in the Secret Service in protection, and I'm not an expert, but apparently he became an expert somewhere up in Pennsylvania. I don't know where.
As an aside, by the way, the fellow we talked about in the last interview, Vince Palamara,
yeah.
You've seen his letter to the about your book?
I've not read it, no.
I'm sure you probably know that he said that Mrs. Kennedy and Me is highly recommended to everyone for its honesty and rich body of truth. He actually fully endorsed your book, even though he's been critical of...
Well, I'll accept his endorsement.
Are you worried that he's being...
Well, maybe he has some secret agenda. I don't know, but I accept his praise. Thank you.
My assessment of Mr. Palamara is that he called probably all of the agents, and what agent who answers a phone is going to answer a question, was President Kennedy easy to protect? Well, probably he was too easy to protect because he was assassinated. But the fact that the agents aren't going to tell him anything, and he alludes to the fact that when I wrote the book, most of these people were dead. Well, I worked with these people. I knew them like brothers, and I knew exactly what was going on. And I always respected Jim Rowley because he stood up to the issue and said, look, we can't say the president invited himself to be killed, so let's squash this. So, Mr. Palamara, there are a number of things that have happened, but he has no credibility. He's a self-described expert in his area, which I don't know what it is. He was born after the assassination, and he keeps creating solutions to the assassination until they're proven wrong. So he's the Zapruder film. When the Zapruder film is run at normal speed, another theme that Palamara throws out is that Bill Greer stopped the car. When it's run at its normal speed, you'll notice the car absolutely does not stop at all. This happened in less than 6 seconds after the president was hit in the throat.
There are so many stories out there that are strictly theory. People claim that they're experts. They have no basis to make that claim. I was a special agent in charge of Vice President Protection, special agent in charge of Presidential Protection, and Assistant Director of Protective Forces for the United States Secret Service. I'm not an expert, but apparently some of these people out there who write these books and concoct these theories are experts.
Well, he can tell you what he wants done, and he can tell you certain things, but that doesn't mean you have to do it. And what we used to do was always agree with the president, then we do what we felt was best anyway. Well, he can tell you what he wants done, and he can tell you certain things, but that doesn't mean you have to do it. And what we used to do was always agree with the president, then we do what we felt was best anyway.
I spoke to the special agent in charge of the White House detail, the #1 agent, Gerald Bain. I asked him, President Kennedy, I understand he was difficult to protect, right? He didn't want the agents on the back of the car, and he told me, this is the exact quote, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of the car. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. Well, one by one, I spoke to many of his colleagues, not only in the Secret Service, but actually White House aides that were not Secret Service agents, and it was a landslide. They were all telling me the same thing.